welcome to my presentation. It's a lovely small group compared to last year, which means that you've got very good taste. I've called it Reflections on Another Year of Retro Repair, in the sense that I've been working professionally servicing all kinds of vintage computers, electronics, and CRT televisions. And it's hard to sort of convey how much I've fitted into this past year, but I've learnt so much along the way that that's part of this talk, is just to try and share some insights, not necessarily about how to fix one thing in particular, but basically just worth getting stuck in there. But there's some things we can do to make that a bit easier. And so this slide is just a little photo that I found. While my name is Jeremy, you can call me Mike TV. I remember back in looking back at some old photos to put together this presentation, and there's a photo of me sitting on a bench in the kitchen, and I've taken all of the rice out of the jar, just even as an infant sitting there, happy as anything, and Mum's grabbed the camera. There's something in me that just likes taking things apart and playing with what's inside. The next photo is, in the sense of my memories, is that I'd put a Hot Wheels toy car through the front flap of the VCR, just so that I could take it apart and take the Hot Wheels out. To add to that story, at Macquarie Primary School, we put together this booklet that was all about you, and it was in year 2, 1996, and it has, you know, what's your favourite colour, who's in your family, name your brothers and sisters, and what do you want to be when you grow up. And I remember this guy saying, you know, policeman, fireman, that sort of thing. And I found the booklet, and it says in there, a TV repairman and Bill Gates. Part of what we're here today is that we are all in alignment with things that we enjoy. And it's just a reminder of that we all marvel at the joy of turning something on. It's as if these years have not passed, something still works. So we enjoy that consistency in it. And essentially I'm saying that my hobby business, which is part of my life now, it is part of my purpose. I am in alignment, even though it's a capacitor and it's a resistor. It's actually because I'm here to uplift people. It's the person behind what is being repaired that is essentially finding joy in it. The computer doesn't care. Most of them want to live. As humble as a resistor and a capacitor can be, it's a beautiful thing to find a job that's not just purely trading time for money. It's being able to service the equipment too and all that sort of stuff. But, you know, still at 36 years old, there I am tinkering with the television. So I've just wanted to get that message that it's good to be in alignment with your purpose. Some overview of the session, it's looking at the two letters RH, which for me is red herring. It's a big problem in repair, but it also stands for rabbit hole. I hear that a lot from people. I went down this rabbit hole. Talking about surface mount resistors, last year I talked about capacitors. That's still just as relevant, but surface mount resistors is just worth touching on. A bit of commentary on soldering and how dry your joints. The complexity of repair, it is going up as more components fail. So we've got our low-hanging fruits, caps and so on. And also some themes about, look, you know, don't turn something on until. So what am I really talking about? I'm essentially saying, in red herrings, the term originated from the practice of using strong-smelling smoked fish, which were red herrings, to throw hunting dogs off of the trail. In literature, especially in mystery and detective fiction, it's used to describe a plot device where something seems important or suspicious, but turns out to be irrelevant. So that's a red herring. How does that fit into vintage electronics? Well, we are all amateurs, and test equipment, like an oscilloscope, the reason I don't like them is they don't say good or bad egg, right? It doesn't, very rarely does test equipment actually say, yes, this is faulty. But things can read as a short, things can read as open circuit, and you don't know if that's right. And you can spend a bit of time in your head thinking, oh, I need to replace this transistor. You buy that transistor and it turns out it wasn't actually the problem. So what am I really talking about here? It's just, or talking about RH, red herrings or rabbit holes, it's that I actually feel a little responsible for your time. When things get too hard in trying to fix something yourself, this isn't fun anymore, is an awful place to be in. So while my talk is trying to inspire you to get stuck in and service the things that you own, it's very possible that it gets frustrating. It's very possible that you'll source or put effort into sourcing a part that you didn't need. But there are some easier ways to go through troubleshooting and fault finding, and we'll touch on those. No matter what, if you make mistakes, tell somebody. Part of getting more efficient in sort of getting through these examples of what can go wrong, like getting RAM that's mismatched, expecting something, as I was saying, diodes to be shorted and capacitors and so on. It's that somebody could have told you, check this out, it's got to be this, it's got to be this. But please always feed back and just say, well, no, I've learned from my mistakes, because all of that learning is worth it. I can't believe how much transferable skill I've developed from fixing something that I would never have thought I'd be interested in. It's sort of very good to get stuck in. Now, part of a talk is you're supposed to give a bit of the story, what did you discover? All I'm just saying is that I'll never forget that capacitor that was shorted, or was it? So this is a photo of an Amiga 4000T motherboard, worth specifying in the sense that I can't warrant that. It's a precious bloody board, okay? So that's why someone's asked me to recap it, because they don't want to do it themselves. I'd put all of the effort into laying down my favourite little tantalum capacitors, which have now 3 times the price. They've gone up and up and up in 2 years. $3 a capacitor now. So I get it all done. Trickiest, most meticulous work ever. I've done everything I know in my cards, played every card I know to make sure there's no shorts on the board. And before I turn it on, I get my multimeter and I just check the capacitors, and everything is going beep. Short circuit, short circuit, short circuit, short circuit, short circuit. I'm thinking, what? It's a red herring, because the multimeter is telling me it's a short. So what do? I take every capacitor off one at a time, check underneath where the bridge is, there's no bridge. I check every capacitor. They're brand new, why should they be faulty? But there's a short on the board. I can't turn this guy's board on. It's just going to go up in smoke somewhere. I've got no parts, no replacements for it, blah, 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 blah. It was a red herring. Because the meter, there's so many capacitors on this board, and this board is designed so well that my little, they call it a DMM, multimeter, couldn't actually charge the capacitor up enough to even get a reading. So it just read as a short. Nobody told me that a little multimeter just can only put in like 10 milliamps. So in a bigger circuit, you can start to get these false readings like shorts when there isn't a short. So that was 5 nights of my life I lost. It's very common to get obsessed with what your test equipment is telling you, and it just wastes your time. So that's partly what we're talking about, is saving your time. So how to avoid these sort of red herrings and getting stuck into your head? Remembering that while I'm saying, please, step 1 is to get a second board or a second unit for comparison's sake. I remember I can find it very difficult to get a second exact model of something. But if you're a collector, that is part of the general advice, is to have 2 of everything, which is also a bit of a curse. But do try and keep something on hand so that you can just go over to that second board. Ooh, is this a short here? Yes, it is. It reads as a short because your meter or whatever can't charge up the circuit. So just make sure you've got something to compare it against. If you're repairing something alone, you can't always ask questions. And if you want somebody else to say, hey, look, my meter reads this at this part of the circuit, somebody then has to go over to their cupboard, take their computer out, take it out and get you back that measurement. That people don't really have time. So if you've got 2, you can always make your own comparisons, which is very important. Second thing is, honestly, write your findings down on paper. Chances are, if you are fixing something, you're doing it after work, you're a bit tired, and so you think you're repeating the same test on something else, but you've got your probes backwards, and then it all just gets confusing. So just take good notes. This is an example here of the most simplest things. I literally say my red probe was on the base of the transistor and my black probe was on the emitter. My red was on the base and my black was on the collector. Sometimes you're just so tired you can't even remember. How do I repeat the same test? We're just literally checking 3 pins here, right? But I'm saying, where did I put my red probe and my black probe so I can write down the reading? So you can repeat it the next time over. Use a variety of test equipment, and this includes your eyes. So thinking of red herrings, you might have, like I was saying, my multimeter can't actually charge that circuit up, so it thinks it's a short. I've found that different types of test equipment can give different results and different readings. Some multimeters don't like the frequency of the circuit that's running, so you can get wacky voltage readings that way. Some oscilloscopes can't lock onto the signal properly, so they trigger at the wrong level and give you different answers. I've found it's surprising how much it's helped me using a variety of test equipment just to check, is this really a short, is this really leaky, that sort of thing. Another thing you can help to sort of as a sort of a sanity check if you're repairing things and needing to try and save some time is try and think about, okay, what can I use? I think some of the term is hive mind. There are community resources out there. The worst thing is Facebook, but it's also the best thing because Google does not scrape Facebook groups. It just doesn't, because you have to be a member to join there, okay? But that is where some of the commentary is these days. It's not always on forums now. It's in Facebook groups. So find a Facebook group, and an example here is that under this file section is my Vectrex diode mode spreadsheet. There's probably one other person this year that wants to fix a Vectrex that'll use that spreadsheet, but it's one example of many. The idea came from this broad term, the Chinese, but fixing iPhones without schematics. What did they do? They came up with their own forum community resources where they would put their black probe on ground and the red probe on pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and write down with and share what was the voltage drop on each pin for each IC. And if you had open circuit or short on certain pin, then they would at least know, okay, try just replace this chip. So you'd be surprised how much reverse engineering is going into fixing iPhones. That sort of notion is also in retro repair stuff because schematics don't tell you very much. They don't. They're not a teacher standing over your shoulder explaining, oh no, do it this way. So check out what community resources exist because diode mode means you can just use your multimeter. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need an oscilloscope. And you just write down the numbers. And then I've got a column here for your results. So we've had 3 Vectri fixed by going through and just checking, oh yeah, John's pin 10 reads as an open line. So maybe we replace that chip. Remember, if it's open, it's not short. So it's not going to heat up on an infrared camera. It's just, if I'm getting off track now, but that's a YouTube favorite at the moment because they're all being sent infrared cameras. So let's check this short and find it. But it takes a lot of energy to make something glow on an infrared camera if they're not very sensitive. Blah, blah, blah. We'll talk about that later. Resources. So this is just not really, we're talking about Commodores and Megas and stuff. Why I've got an example here of an Apple HomePod. This is another example of reverse engineering that's gone into community resources that's meant that so much stuff has been saved from going into landfill. And it's one guy in his bedroom kind of thing. So Nick's Fix. He started to go, okay, how can I get these HomePods repaired? He started by just measuring the watts. So if it draws 2 watts on his little watt meter, then it's most likely this fault. If it draws 10 watts, it could be this. And if it gets hot on this side, it's that. From that, he's come up with the website that you can freely scroll through, and he says, okay, no power, there's a shorted diode. So the symptom, no power, no lights, and no response. Power draw at the outlet will typically be around 2 to 10 watts. If they've plugged in for some time, the side will feel slightly warmer. So if you have that fault, then you can blindly just go ahead and assume that diode is shorted and start the repair that way. I'm just surprised there is much more community resources out there. So we're talking about saving a precious time. A lot of how I've felt is that I need to reinvent this wheel. I'm the guy that's going to find the short. I'll figure out what's wrong with this. But probably somebody else has already done it. It's really surprising how much of these faults that we're finding in our hardware, somebody else has fixed it. So save yourself some time by checking community resources. And a bit different is just I'm saying think outside of these boxes. So this is my lovely Rosewood Chrysler 1961 26-inch black and white tube television. It doesn't even have a model name, it's just a 79 4A. And you think, okay, I'll start with the schematic. Very reasonable place to start, but this is still somewhat unhelpful. There's no commentary behind it. But one thing you can have commentary with is AI. So I took a lovely scan of that schematic and I said to Claude, for this vintage television, I'm studying the schematic which is attached. I started out by reading all the values and putting them into a table, so I gave it a little spreadsheet. What other information can you extract from the schematic? Can you list the diodes or summarize the circuits? Please give me as much detail as you possibly can understand. Now, it gave me, not only did it give me, this is just 2 screenshots of about an 8-page document that it spitted back from one schematic. It just gave me headings. I was like, oh, okay. Critical voltage test points on your power supply, stage by stage. Later on in the document, it gave me what it believed a breakthrough of how the video, the extra high voltage and the horizontal systems work. In your video section, you've got the blanking circuits. Okay, the blanking pulses are applied to the CRT grid during retrace. It has a bandwidth of 5 megahertz. The main EHT from valve 14, which is a 1S2, is expected to be 18 kilovolts, rectified from the flyback transformer. What? It knew all of that from the schematic. And it's not bullshit, because I started to go through it and check it. I did have to ask it a couple of times, essentially, are you sure? Which is a very good prompt to give AI. But what I'm saying is I could then ask it questions. Why do I have minus 18 volts at plate 7? You've got that issue? Have you looked here? He got excited. I said, why is the sound buzzing on such and such? It got excited. I was then able to feed the same schematic through ChatGTP and sort of get a bit of a cross-reference. So nobody has told me to put a single schematic into AI yet. And it's actually working very well. I've used it for that Chrysler. What's the next slide? No, and I've also used it for Sony service manuals have a bit of a lore online as being really good. They're incredibly frustrating to me. They're not helpful, okay? Essentially, thank you for listening. I've put one through Claude and said, for this PVM monitor, this is the service manual, but I'm stuck on. And I was able to ask it questions that I would never be able to discern from that schematic. So just, again, we're talking about red herrings, saving your time. Do consider asking ChatGTP or Claude. There's others, I'm sure. One other little example was voltage injection. That's a bit hot on the YouTube traps as well at the moment. Well, it's a complex thing, okay? I used ChatGPT to ask me, I gave it the schematic of a Power Macintosh logic board, and I said, I would like to try some voltage injection. Where would you inject the voltage, and how many milliamps would you current limit to, and how would you do the current limiting? Because I didn't want to use a bench power supply. I said I wanted to use a battery. So it told me, okay, I want you to use this type of resistor to drop the voltage down. I want you to put it into this point and then come back with your values. So I did the readings and then it thought about it and gave me just a bit of feedback. So while you sort of can be working on this stuff, like I said, after work, if you ask somebody a question, they've got to go get their stuff out of the cupboard, it's not going to happen. You can get some feedback with ChatGTP and Claude. So that's the coolest thing I've been using lately. Now, the next theme I said I'd just like to touch on is surface mount resistors. And in Star Trek Voyager, one of the running jokes that I've seen, at least in the get-together panels, the reunions, is they might say a fan comes up to the table and they ask the crew about this particular alien species. They've forgotten, they don't know what the person's talking about. And they say, oh, was it species 8472? And they say, oh, yeah, it was 8472. Well, in this particular thing, this is R598, right? R598, everyone's talking about R598. But it is true. This is the Sony PVM14M4A, which has a motherboard that has bad caps, okay? It's got big, fat, juicy caps that people think are fine. It's got little caps that people think are fine, but they're bad. But what happens after you recap them? You still get this vertical squish, image is all squashed, which is always a capacitor, but is it? What the community has found is that it's R598. It's a 1/10 watt resistor that doesn't go short, so it doesn't show up on your infrared thermometer that you got influenced by on YouTube. It doesn't show up if you do any other kind of alcohol. It doesn't get hot. It just is open circuit. So I'm just saying, be wary of surface mount resistors going open circuit, because that's it there. You've got a whole board of things. You've got bad caps, you've fixed those, you've redone your dry joints and your image is still squished. It's that. So that is a community thing as well, but it's also just a reminder to check if things are open. It's very easy to check for shorts because your multimeter will beep if it's short, but it does nothing if it's open circuit. So you can easily fly through and go, oh, that's fine, it's fine. But things are getting old enough that even surface mount resistors are failing. And they fail so gracefully that they fly under the radar because they don't go up in smoke, right, like a little tantalum. The next theme is talking about electrolyte, and this is a slide from last year where I've said that traditionally embalming is an act of preserving a corpse from decay, removing the blood and guts so that it lasts forever. But our motherboards, our precious computers that we're all holding on to are being embalmed by way of leaking batteries and capacitors. So it's not an act of preservation, but they're being injected with something, and it's corrosive. So what does electrolyte and battery acid love? It loves copper, and that's what all of our circuit boards are made of. These traces, these paths that connect everything together are just grain to be snuffled up. It just eats it. So I've just said that electrolyte and leak batteries eat the copper as an act of hibernation. No, I've typed it twice just to be fun. So it's very true. You put something in storage, put a plastic bag over it, or you keep it in the original box, it can't breathe. And so it can also off-gas. I did have baked beans this morning, but there's other forms of off-gassing. It's the fact that surface mount capacitors, as they leak, the electrolyte itself creates a gas, which then sits in there and moves the corrosion along. So similar theme, but we're past the surface mount resistors. Everyone will check if something's open circuit if they're really stuck. Now, have you said to yourself, the audio on my PlayStation 1 is a bit quiet. My audiophile PlayStation 1 is a bit quiet. I need a new laser in my CD player, it's skipping. I need a new laser in my Laserdisc player. I need a new camping fridge because it's not getting cold. I need a new LCD screen for my PowerBook because it's just flickering on a grey screen. I need a new power steering controller for my boat because the wheel doesn't turn. And my professional monitor that I paid $2,000 for off eBay has no vertical hold, it's just flickering. These are all customers that I've had in the past 6 months. All 6 of them were because of surface mount terrorists. These little effers. So this is a Sony 5-disc CD player. It's a super audio CD player, so it has a cape. Underneath the laser assembly is this little control board. And what's there? There's actually a capacitor that's fallen off. It was so crusty. So do you need a new laser, or do you need the surface mount capacitors changed? They're hidden. They're everywhere, and they're tiny. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So this is an obvious example. There's something a bit crusty here, maybe, okay? These are 5 millimeters in width, and that's the most common size. So whenever you're looking at surface mount capacitors, you just zoom in on the smallest ones and do those first. But you can see how this brown wasn't supposed to be there. That's electrolyte tracking, and that's what's underneath each capacitor. So that's just around the bezel of the PowerBook. And you think, okay, the screen's flickering, I've got a bad power supply. Maybe I'll change that. But really, you just keep turning on that. What do you think that's doing to the circuit? It's just this horrible state of juiciness. And yes, this is common. This is the power book, but that's what one of the, at least a handful of the ones on that Sony CD player looked like underneath. This fishy, juicy, goopy grossness. That's after some cleaning up, yeah? And me retinning the pads, so there's hope. It's not lost forever. Now, the cool thing is that I was able to get this all back and working, and the screen was lovely, but the guy posted it to me without following the instructions, which was to put some bubble wrap over the keyboard. So he actually smashed his screen from it landing on the trackball in post. I did say to him, do you want me to go ahead and bother with these capacitors? But essentially, we couldn't get him another screen. And so just for that little bit there, the whole screen works perfectly otherwise. So, yeah, I think you get what I'm saying, is that just hidden behind this plastic is all of that corrosion. And the more you turn that stuff on, the more it also kills further things down the track. Just another Macintosh example. These are not surface mount, but the general gist is you quote, you don't need to do these. These are these little half-height electrolytic capacitors, but this floppy drive, you think, oh, it's mechanical. I'll clean it. It doesn't format disks. It's ejecting disks. It doesn't know what to do with them. It's got to be the head. Let's clean the head. Let's lubricate the rails. It still doesn't work. It was just the capacitors the whole time because they're so old. 1984, 1983 date stamp on that. Okay, so there's 5 little tiny, they should be fine. No, that's on the 5-watt rail, that's on the 12-watt rail. So that's your main power going through these little things, and underneath it's stank of fish. So they have leaked. I'll get one little bit of vengeance because it's such a small group, but I had a customer pay me to recap his Commodore 64C. It's exactly what he wanted. He gave it to somebody else that said, you didn't need to do those capacitors. Well, not all capacitors are the same in how they fail, because these are meant to be coppered paths. I know this is a dramatic example, but this is still from this year. Things do leak. So if you want to recap something ahead of time, it's not a dirty thing to do that. It should be fine. No, it's 2025. Please get stuck in. What I've said here is that diodes have corrosion coming in and out. So this kind of stuff, corrosion, it doesn't sort of, you look at it top down and there's some green crystals and so on, but to get there it's had to go through something. It's not a sprinkling of fairy dust. All this sort of electrolyte tracks through your whole board, so that's partly what we're talking about here. I mean, why are we keeping vintage computers, monitors, if they're just going to sit there and rot? We're keeping them because we want them to work and enjoy them, but I just thought I'd give some rationale on why does this happen? Why are things leaking? Well, when it comes to surface mount resistors, we start with a capacitor that's, say, that high. It's then shrunk down to this tiny little 5mm width thing, which means it has way less surface area to deal with the temperatures that it's exposed to. It's got way less rubber in there as a stopper to keep it intact. So there's the time as well that goes into, we know that rubber seals break down. The contents of a capacitor is corrosive and it's smaller. It also physically sits closer to the board. It doesn't run through an axial lead. When it comes to your typical capacitors as well, it can just be crap parts or a bad batch. But it also can be that they're being worked too hard. So that goes back to community resources. Some people will know that one capacitor always gets driven really hard in that circuit, and so you would replace that first. So it's just been exposed basically to more current than it could handle. That leads to premature failure or heat stress. So the capacitor was just working too hard because it was sitting next to a heat sink. That's very common in Sony TVs, for example. They're all got these big heat sinks because there's a lot of heat there, but then they put 3 electrolytic capacitors touching the heat sink. Like it's really common. So whenever I'm repairing something, my eyes zoom into, where are the heat sinks? And are there a little electrolytic capacitor sitting next to it? This is just an example of Macintosh. It's a Color Classic board that's been cleaned with alcohol. So I mentioned this last year that alcohol is not a solvent for electrolyte, it just moves it. That shouldn't have anything in between those pins, right? And that is not a sprinkling of fairy dust. That's got there through. Okay? So part of what I'm saying is wash and clean your boards. Don't turn stuff on. This is a classic too. That's its little voltage regulator. You can see that it's sit next, there are those two little cans, they're 7 mils wide. So anything closer to those, I have a good look at. And you can see here, that should be beautiful, bright metal, but it's just eaten away from all this leaked stuff and then turned on after 30 years just to see if it works. It's fun. Well, that chip went up. So sort of that stuff is avoidable. Capacitors, they're not bulging, they're not leaking. I hear that all the time. Is that bulging? Nope. But what's underneath it is that. Part of the reason we're talking about that is that we can check for things in circuit, but circuits are not always just one bit of power coming through and out of a capacitor. There actually can be banked up. So if you've got a pair of capacitors, so have a look at this one. You can see that green there, that is leaking and corroding. This is the photo after it's been taken out. So there's two there. They sit there, but it reads fine in circuit. How could that be when I showed you that capacitor leg is sort of eating itself to death? Because there's two together. So the meter can't differentiate one from the other. So that's one of those red herring things. You can see that I've taken it out of circuit. It says it's open. It's dead. It doesn't even exist, but you don't know that until you take it out of circuit. Now, there's a lot of capacitors and things, so how can you justify recapping? The capacitors are going up and up in price. It's also possible that every other part in your device isn't off the shelf. So, if you put all these caps in, can you get the part for something else that might fail? No. And then, if you do put a capacitor in, it won't let me zoom in, but just don't put crap back. This is a Hitano capacitor, which you can just see is bulging. It went up in smoke after someone had recapped it, and it damaged. It sort of had made irreversible damage. So if we're thinking about, we're going to recap, please put quality stuff back in, or come to me. What can be done about some of this stuff? These examples here of things being webbed together. Well, I've had this slide up since last year as well, is that the SafeWash 2000 SWA, it's just like shaving cream, comes with an applicator, so it's fun to play with. You just spray it on, work it in, let it sit for 10 minutes and rinse the board off. We did that with your Super Nintendo and it sent shivers down your spine. Go, do I put water on my board? Like what? Yes, yep, yes. Clean things. Thinking about red herrings and what can be done, we start from the beginning as well. So I've had, I drove to Ganmain, New South Wales to buy a professional Sony CRT monitor from this lovely esoteric guy, Baz Leffler. And I got home basically and it didn't work. It was working when it was there and it didn't work just after 2 hours in the car trip and blah, 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 blah. The monitor had sat on the floor. Obviously the carpet had been a bit wet or damp. The power jack was completely blue. I got a cotton swab with alcohol in it and just cleaned the pins and it was fluorescent blue. And I thought, oh shit, there's so much corrosion in there. This was honestly a couple of weeks ago. This was a guy saying that his TV was pulsing. It's arcing, it's the flyback, right? I just went, I'm just going to start. He said to me it came from a hoarder's house. And I went, damp. I just knew, right, from this thing. That's what his power plug looked like. So it can be as simple as getting a fiberglass pen out or a Dremel with a copper braid. I've got one here. That's the after. That looks a lot more reasonable, doesn't it? So go back to the start. If you're getting faults come up, question. Think critically. Is my power cord okay? Is the power socket okay? Or is the connector okay? This is just a Dremel Micro with a brass brush that I've gone. It makes that sound, I promise. So essentially, we know that caps are bad. We know that things leak and things are rotted, blah, 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 blah. And we know that there's some commentary online, a lot of commentary about dim bulbing. I touched on that last year, but that's essentially another story. But what I'm saying is you don't need that. You need to take a good look. Yeah, pretty OH&S friendly photo. That's just my favorite thing. It's a little loop. So if I ever do this in a talk, you know what I'm saying? I look at it through a magnifying glass. Just have a look. Go over the board and just see, are there cracked solder joints? Is there excessive, are there some black tracks that need to be cleaned up? Get in there and have a look. Familiarize yourself with your hardware, because the way to sort of safely turn something on is typically to use this dim bulb thing. But I don't think that's sort of where it's at. The whole rationale is that if you use the dim bulb, it will absorb some current from the thing being turned on after being in storage for 30 years. The capacitors will self-heal. It slows down how quickly something turns on, so you've got more time to sort of turn it off if something starts to go up in smoke. But all of that is sort of not relevant. It's only for 1950s stuff with valves. Anything we're touching is honestly all switch mode power supply. So all a dim bulb does is create a brownout, which makes the power supply oscillate and go. It doesn't work. A dim bulb will not save you if you have a cracked solder joint. So just get in there and have a good look. Now this slide is just a bit rando, but if anybody is servicing a CRT, these prongs can't sit on the outside of the tube. They actually need to go in, right? This is still a contemporary problem. Last month, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, you name it. You've got to really click them in and get a good seal on them. If you're posting me a board to fix and I post it back to you, people are still scared of high voltage even though it's been off for a month, and they don't sit that thing back in properly. So please double check that. Now, I've talked about this. Yeah, essentially that test equipment, I said use a variety of test equipment. These little ESR meters, which I showed before that said open circuit, with that capacitor with the rotted leg, it will give you red herrings as well. So it's one of the things that they tell you to buy, but essentially I've found that they just keep suggesting capacitors are good when they aren't. Yeah, this was just for my CRT aficionados. This is a book from February 1969. That little rubber thing I showed you that clips onto the back of a CRT. It's got all kinds of names, but they hadn't decided what the name was back then. So it was called the Final Accelerator Contact Connector. Just a fun fact. The other thing was that this is, there's about 5 billion of these made and thrown out. This is just a tube socket that the tube sat in. 14 karat gold plated contacts. You forget how, we use this earth so much. This is the last slide, but this is just in the last 2 months. What have I worked on? Just in case there were questions, I'd love to chat to people. Macintosh SE30s, lots of them. They're hotter than ever. I don't know what's happening, but I'm getting SE30s out the wazoo. Sony 34-inch did an RGB mod on that. PVM 2950, PVM 1444, KV29s, Power Macintosh and Commodore 64C. They're just the last couple of months. So please, whoever wants to ask me questions, themes on CRTs, Apple monitors, I know them. Macs, I know them. Now, as far as what I've said today, we've talked about getting stuck in, familiarizing yourself with the hardware. There's so many software guys here that I've spoken to, but you don't need to sort of be a hardware professional repair dude to see, okay, what can I teach my pattern recognition brain? I can teach it what a dry solder joint looks like. I can teach it to look for leaked electrolyte. I can get stuck in with my multimeter to check for shorts, check for things that are open. And I sure as hell can search Facebook, if not scroll on it, to ask people how to get in and repair things. We know that capacitors are cheap enough, so you can justify repairing them. And it's quite an approachable thing. Please enjoy repairing your hardware, enjoy your collection, open it up, and make some mistakes, feed that back, because we're keeping all this stuff for a reason. We like it, we like the hardware, but it just doesn't last forever. And if it's going to sit there and suffer leakage, it's quite a sad thing that's reversible. So I hope that's been interesting. That's the end of my talk.